Most of you probably know, we live in a world where YouTube is getting about 50 hours of video uploaded to it per minute. And as we just learned this morning, there's over 3 billion views on YouTube every day. So it's the new television, it's the new place for video content. Ad dollars are going into the internet. People, actually ad spend online is going to surpass print for the first time in 2012. What we want to do with our panel here is really to find out how this fantastic web content is being created, how it's distributed, how it's monetized in the digital age, and we want to discuss how old media companies, new media companies, and brands work together with great technology, and how we collaborate, how we innovate in this world, and maybe a little bit how we compete as well for some things. So that's what we want to find out this morning. I've already briefly mentioned who we have. Jessie has a show called The Valley Girl. Jessie is one of these phenomena who have created a fantastic show that then, through the internet, has reached an audience. Jessie's views are now up to 2 million views per video, up from just about tens of thousands of views only a year ago. She's built her own distribution network with about 30 distribution partners in the last year, with anyone from Roku to Boxy to iTunes, so it's really a big hit. And just so that you all get an idea of what Jessie does, we have a little piece of content to show that gives you an idea. Video, please.
I'm Jessie Draper, the Valley Girl. What does your company do? Have you ever Googled yourself? Totally. What makes a great entrepreneur? What's your next big idea? Tweeting's like my favorite. Let's talk business. I'm like the Valley Girl. Let's have an aha moment, shall we?
Okay.
Aha!
Yeah.
What's your favorite sandwich? You would eat insects on the floor to make this company happen. That is passion.
That's passion.
That's passion, right? Mardi Gras! I love Mardi Gras! So fun! Okay, so with babies, I feel like babies blow bubbles. Like they blow a lot of bubbles.
Yeah.
Bubbles. Bubbles everywhere. Did I mention bubbles?
So what Jessie does is she's actually made something that's very complicated to lots of people, the Silicon Valley, become something that's entertaining, fun, and accessible. Because what you don't see in this show reel, if you don't know all these great people, is that Jessie actually has some of the greatest minds and business leaders of the Silicon Valley and technology as a whole come to her studio, and it's becoming something really fun and entertaining. So that leads on to Maker Studios and Danny's company, which effectively is everything from the hottest thing in town in Los Angeles, which the capital of entertainment globally is quite a compliment, which I was told yesterday by Spencer from Wired, to also being one of the first content companies that has received VC funding, which for the VCs in the room is quite the break of a taboo, which is fantastic news for all of us that somebody's finally managed to do it, to go from all these Excel sheets and scalable softwares as a service to doing something that's actually fun. So that's pretty good. And what they have done is they've aggregated and joined forces with all these YouTube stars that have emerged over the last few years, and they've built a business that has 500 million views every month. So lots of old media companies can only dream of these numbers. And let's see with what they've achieved this video. Then we have Yoel Flohr, who's the VP of Digital for Shine Group, Liz Murdoch's production company, bought by News Corp last year. Massive success. Old media company, been around for over 10 years, traditional video production company on commissions basis. And now transitioning into a fantastic new media model, creating brands and media properties. Things like MasterChef, global hits, and they're basically building new media brands that are totally driven by the digital world. And thankfully, they're also investing into digital companies. Yoel's just made the first 2 acquisitions, one last year, Bossa Studios, and the last one, I believe, last week?
Yes. First week of January.
First week of January, so good start into the new year for the digital content world. And let's see what MasterChef, their biggest hit so far around the globe, is doing. Video, please.
Doesn't get tougher than this.
MasterChef! This is MasterChef! MasterChef. Mästerkock.
That's the best dish of the night.
There's definitely a competition going on here.
It was absolutely divine.
It's enorme.
This is the beginning of a new life for me.
So you can see what that looks like cross-media across the globe. It's a shame we haven't got any few more of these old media companies in here, because I think they could all learn something.
Let's just call us media companies.
Let's
and
call
not
them a
old
media company. I think that's true.
Feel it all.
Exactly. But some of these less innovative guys would have done well to be here this morning. And then moving on to WPP. Mark Reed, he's a board member at WPP and the CEO of WPP Digital. WPP is the largest media holding in the world, if you haven't heard of it so far. Been around for 25 years. They're one of the largest media buying agencies in the world. They build web TV interfaces. They have creative agencies. You might have seen the CEO of Young & Rubicam speak yesterday. And they represent some of the world's greatest brands. I think it's 326 out of the Fortune 500, if I read that correctly. And what they're doing now as well is they're obviously helping brands transition into the digital age, helping them make their messages desirable, moving away from intrusive advertising, and fortunately investing in new media companies as well. Probably the most prolific was last year's investment into Vice. I believe it was $34 million, the press release said. Vice being a fantastic media company that has, and we're going to see a video now of the Creators Project, which is a project they've done together with Intel, which is probably the most prolific example of how an old, sort of uncool technology brand can suddenly become an opinion leader in the cultural space. Video, please.
The Creators Project is an unprecedented global arts initiative showcasing artists, musicians, and filmmakers who are using technology to push the bounds of creative expression and enables them to realize new artworks. The Creators Project is a media platform, including an active website featuring daily editorial and documentaries on the world's most compelling artists, hailing mostly from the United States, UK, Brazil, China, Korea, France, and Germany. To date, more than 17 million people have visited the site, and the video content has been viewed more than 80 million times. The Creators Project also has a traveling event series featuring films, panels, installations, and music performances by top bands and DJs from all around the world.
Thank you. you. So, well, and just lastly, a few words about Crane TV. We're a storytelling company in this whole media space with two sides to our business. One side is a video magazine for contemporary culture, where we try to give the old print publishing industry a bit of a run for their money. We create a video magazine on art, design, fashion, lifestyle, and travel. And because we believe that the world is moving from a campaign-driven world to a story-driven world, we have, over the last year, developed a brand storytelling business where we work with the likes of Ralph Lauren, American Express, and BMW, and help them craft their messages into stories which are then actually desirable to audiences. And are starting to build editorial strategies and actually execute them for brands, including all the distribution channels, which are increasingly important. And I've brought a little video for you as well to see what we do with our magazine side. Video, please. So, and with this, let's kick off with a starting introductory question to all of you. Let's start off with Danny, Maker Studios. You guys are United Artists, Charlie Chaplin, 1919. Danny, Lisa, Courtney in 2011, 2012. When did you start it?
We actually started summer 2009.
2009. Yeah. So can you just give us a quick overview how the whole thing started, how it went from one YouTube celebrity to many YouTube celebrities to 500 million views, VC funding, and this massive success story that we're all very impressed by?
Sure, I'll try to sum it up. Well, basically, you know, Lisa, Ben, and I had all come to LA kind of to get into the entertainment industry and had various experiences, but all kind of ended up frustrated by that system, and I'd started our own small production company right around the time that YouTube kind of came out, and so we just got really inspired by the platform and the ability to kind of reach a global, worldwide audience, and really became very obsessed with the site early in 2006. We had many different channels and kind of experimented with how to build audience and how to kind of transition audience from one channel to the next. Lisa started her channel shortly after, and she became one of the biggest YouTube stars in the early days of YouTube, and actually got cast on Mad TV, and so we kind of got thrust back into the Hollywood kind of thing again, pitching TV shows and auditioning. She was, had agents and managers, all that kind of stuff, which was very exciting, and it was great, but while we didn't really want to look at YouTube as a stepping stone, we felt it was the future, and all that time spent pitching and auditioning kind of took away from us actually creating content, on the platform, and so we eventually decided just to go all in on YouTube, and we created Maker Studios kind of out of the idea that we're not pitching, we're not auditioning, we have this audience, we can just make the content we want, reach an audience. So. Along with Lisa's channel, which was, one of the very biggest and the most subscribers in the beginning, we had other friends on YouTube who had large subscription bases, so we kind of all pulled together. So it was like an artist-formed company, Maker Studios, and the idea was that we could create a studio system that could support individual content creators to give them, some of what Hollywood has to offer, and being able to have props and wardrobe and locations and people to collaborate with and people to help develop, because as an independent content creator, it's very exciting, but it's also very challenging to do everything on your own, and it can wear on you, so you're looking for some support. So it just grew over time. We realized if we wanted to really become a media company, we needed to achieve a level of scale that, could compete with what you could reach with a television audience. So. After launching the station, which was kind of our first company-owned channel, we began rolling in all the individual talent channels and signing more and more talent, and just kind of slowly grew over about a year and a half. We weren't funded in the beginning, but we grew to probably about 50 channels and close to 200 million views within 18 months, and that's when we got our first round of funding and have been able to kind of steadily grow the business since then, get into various different verticals as well, different types of content. Yeah.
Great. Would be interesting to get a VC perspective later, why someone has to get to 200 million views before they get some money, because you kind of think there's success before that, right? So Jesse, I know you distribute your content a little bit differently. YouTube's not your biggest platform. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you've created the show? It's a fantastic talk show for business that's accessible, 30 distribution deals. Do you just want to give us a bit of background on that?
Sure. So I had a similar experience, I think, to you guys and Lisa. I was on a Nickelodeon show, and I just sort of wasn't into that. Once I saw that I could create my own content on the internet, that's what I wanted to do. Working in LA and New York, I also realized that I grew up in Silicon Valley, and having grown up there, I had a background on business and entrepreneurs that not everyone understands and has, so I started sort of an approachable business talk show. You guys had a really, good time with YouTube. YouTube was very good to you. I, on the other hand, struggled with YouTube. My audience was not growing at the rate I was hoping. I couldn't get out there. And so I took a year off last year, and I did over 30 different distribution deals, including on non-traditional media, including Roku, over 200 television boxes, like Roku and Boxy, were on screens in restaurants across America, and like Taco Bell and Denny's. We're on iTunes, we're on all these applications, and so I just kind of looked for any screen I could find. I was like, I want to get on that, and I think that's, it's a very different approach, but it's working for us, and that's how I built my audience. Because YouTube wasn't giving me what I needed. And I'm a huge fan of YouTube, and I think what they're doing is amazing, but it just wasn't giving me what I needed at the time.
And what's next for you?
Well, I'm still building my brand, building my talk show, and creating content, and it's going well. We're hopefully network television. We're working on that, and we have a book deal, and we have a bunch of stuff going on. So.
It's fantastic. Yoel, your media company, your media business is moving very successfully from just doing commissioned work to building your own media properties. You're investing into digital businesses, and you're building really diversified media properties. Can you explain to us a little bit how you approach this whole thing when you guys realize that you've got to change things and that there's potentially more money and more interesting business in what you're doing now?
Sure. So, sorry. I think the basis of what we're doing is, like actually everybody here on stage, is we are storytellers. So that's what it comes down to. And what we're trying to do is create emotional connections with our audience. And our audience ventures into new platforms, into new canvases, and that's what we're going to do too. So traditionally, like 90% of our audience was on the big screen broadcast, and they're now starting to venture into YouTube and other digital platforms. So the challenge for us was clear. How do we create meaningful relationships with them in all of these new digital platforms? So what we started to do is we looked outside in the market, and we looked into successful models on the web at the moment. The first thing we did was we looked into the social gaming space, and we looked at a completely new type of content, and we see how they envision content and how they interact with content, what the business models are. We brought one company on board, Bossa Studios, and we are learning from them in the moment, like while we're talking in terms of how do you create content in new meaningful ways on these platforms. The second step that we did was we acquired Channel Flip, which is a UK-based online content producer and distributor, which is a similar business to, I would say, Maker Studio on a smaller scale on the UK market at the moment. And the idea here is that we want to learn is how do you create networks on these digital platforms? Because one of the key issues that we have is how do you actually scale on these platforms in a way that's monetizable for us. And that's how we approach the picture for us. So that's where we are. We are learning rapidly. We are building new brands on these platforms. What's interesting is that we are starting to originate brands on digital platforms that we potentially are going to be able to move across multiple platforms. And I say across multiple platforms because I hope that in the future broadcast is one of the platforms that we're going to address, but not the only one. And that's the way that we're currently operating.
Can you give us a sense of the size of the commitment that you're making to this? How many acquisitions are you planning? How much money are you spending on it?
We're not going to talk about money, but it's the beginning. And as said, I think there's a steep learning curve, and in order to learn, you need to grow. And we want to work with as many talented entrepreneurs and startups in the space as possible. So we are currently looking into, especially into the US market, and seeing what the opportunities are. And we're definitely going to have a couple of conversations with people everywhere to see what we can do.
Great. Mark, so you WPP obviously represent a little bit of all of this under the WPP umbrella, creating ads, buying media, investing into digital businesses. So this is obviously stark contrast to what VCs do. You invested into Vice. Can you tell me a little bit about how you react to all of this, how you transition brands from the traditional billboards over to the new media platforms? How do you reach audiences today? And I think what the outlook is for where you're going.
There's a lot of things in that. I think some of it is. I think you have to start by saying some of it is old as it is new. Right? If you go back to Michelin, they produced guidebooks 100 years ago to promote their tires. So the sort of blending of content and content and advertising has sort of always been there. So I think the technology is changing a couple of things. One is it's changing the production processes, right? So these people can produce, professional quality video at 1/10 of the cost that a traditional media company would do. One of the things we thought was attractive about Vice was, they have 3,500 contributors around the world producing content that's going onto their platforms every day at a much, much lower cost than would be able to do historically. So there's a whole sort of changing of the process. Then there's the getting much closer to the content. So in the old world, there's sort of blending of editorial and advertising that was very neat and tidy on traditional television. You watch a program, there's a commercial break, you watch an ad, there's a commercial break. It doesn't work so well on the web. I mean, for all we talk about YouTube, in reality, very little YouTube advertising revenue comes from video. It's mainly banner ads and other forms. So inserting sort of the classic 30-second TV spot into video is much harder to do online, though it's the fastest growing segment of online revenue. So we have to find new ways of sort of blending the commercial message with the editorial. And that's quite difficult to do in a way that audiences really engage with. So the stuff you saw that Vice have done for Intel, I think, does that very well. And as we were looking at the investment in Vice, if you can say such a thing like the investment in Vice, when we talked to big brands, they really felt that it had made an impact on their business. I think the other interesting thing is that content and advertising and commerce are all coming much more closely together on these platforms. So if you think in the UK, 11% of retail sales is now e-commerce. And look at a business like Net-a-Porter. Is Net-a-Porter, it's obviously an e-commerce company. It's in the luxury category where no one thought people would do e-commerce. And it's also a content company because they're producing content and learning from that content what people want to buy. So the sort of blending of content and commerce and the proximity, I think, is very interesting. And I guess traditional media companies find it hard to react quickly enough to lots of those changes. So those, I guess, are some of the things we're seeing.
Yeah. So well, actually, to that, Kantar, one of your research businesses, actually just told us that there is less than one video ad per video played. So that's clearly not the model to make money. Yet everyone's investing in content, and I think from just already this introduction, we can agree that content is a viable business going forward. Hulu just announced they're investing $500 million in original content. People are saying that Netflix is going to be saved by creating original content, and even AOL and Yahoo are creating original content. So there must be money in there somewhere.
TV, look, let's be clear, TV is not going away anytime soon. If you look at our projections for TV advertising over the next 5 years, it's actually going to increase. Yeah. Because markets like Brazil, China, India are growing, and TV is penetrating more quickly there. So TV advertising budgets are not going to go away. And then I think you have to look at the different types of way we consume content. So I was in CES, And it's basically just all about screens now. So it's like small screens, which are called phones, mid-sized screens are called tablets, big screens are called TVs. And that sort of blurring of where you look at content is beginning to take place. And you know, by definition, most of it is video. Now, whether we can insert 30-second TV ads into it in the same way, I think it's going to be hard. I mean, Hulu have done a good job. You watch a 1-hour program, you understand that you can watch TV ads through it. And by giving you the ability to sort of select them and target them, people carry on doing that. But it's not easy when you sort of snack your way through YouTube videos. You know, the first thing you do is, you know, just skip the 10-second pre-roll, don't you? I mean, it's hard. It's harder in that market, I think, the sort of snacking market.
Yeah, no, I agree. So Danny, I mean, how do you guys make money in this environment? I mean, you just raised some VC funding. What revenues and profit plans did you guys present to pull off that trick, and where's the money going to come from for you guys?
Well, I mean, obviously it is primarily, you know, from brand and advertising. You know, the company, we really started it off doing brand integrations and one-off, you know, custom content and things like that, which becomes challenging to scale that, obviously. But, you know, YouTube, although the CPMs are low, you know, we do have a high volume of views, so that keeps, you know, a steady amount of revenue coming in, kind of keeping things afloat. But I think in the long run, we'd like to, you know, really focus on building our individual talent brands and the IP of the projects and things we're creating to a point where we're not 100% reliant on advertising or brands for our revenue. Obviously, it'll always be a big portion, but I think right now we're around 80% of our revenue is from, you know, advertising or brand integration. And, you know, I think with the ability to build an engaged audience around these shows and the talent that we're working with, you know, we can see a lot of other ancillary revenue streams that could balance that out and, you know, hopefully get to more of a 50-50 type situation where it's not 100% reliant on advertising.
Yoel, I mean, how you know, you guys established production company. Can you walk us through a little bit how you see that revenue profit split developing over the next few years?
Sure. So we looked at YouTube a couple of years back, low CPM business, and we said, no way for us. That's not the market. There's not money to make. Our productions are very expensive, so we're not going to touch that. I think the way that we're approaching it since then, or the last couple of years, in the next few years, is actually I'm moving my units away to look at it as a CPM business or as a pure advertising business, and we're looking more at the RP of the average revenue per user, or if there are any consultants here in the room want to come up with a better term, average revenue per fan, or whatever you want to come up with. So we're looking holistically at what the value of this user is. So if you look at one of our big brands, MasterChef, which you just saw there, additional revenue streams which are already today accounting for roughly 50% of the value of that business. So off-air opportunities are actually a massive part of the business, and that's exactly what we're going to try to do in this new digital world, where we're going to create brands that have substantial ancillary revenues. And how do you do that? By creating brands that are meaningful, and by doing so you have a relationship that allows you to create these new revenue streams. And when I'm talking about new revenue streams, it's not just subscription, which is like the traditional model for a content producer, but we're talking about, in the case of MasterChef, of offline events, like massive live events. We're talking about pans and pots. We're talking about books, of iPads, and of websites, and all of these kind of streams. And together is where we believe there's a meaningful market for us. Combine that with the scale of the internet, and that's when you have a really exciting model, and that's what we are really excited about. So getting something like the YouTube model of a lot of scale, combining that with a high ARPU of each of the users, and it's a happy world for us.
I'd like to say something about just advertising on content in general. You know, I think we're about to see a lot of more creative ways of advertising. You know, for us, we're creating new ways all the time. I just had a really cool company approach me called Clickberry, and you know, they want me to do things on the show where people, you know, you say, click on this box to see what's in the box. 90% of the people clicked on the box, and that's, you know, that opens doors for a lot of other things. They also showed me a BMW commercial where you're driving down the road and you have to click on different things throughout the commercial. So I think it's becoming, you know, more interactive. People are consuming media on all different devices, and it's becoming more of just the sort of interactive, engaging experience. So you're part of the commercial, and advertising becomes almost more. And then, you know, there's also these sort of for lack of a better word, ad traps that are set now. You know, you go to the gas station, you're ad trapped. You're like watching the ad at, you know, the gas station. You're, you know, sitting in the back of a taxi cab and they keep playing these ads over and over. You're memorizing them. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's just a new thing and we're figuring out how to deal with that. I'd be curious to hear what Mark has to say on that subject, actually, being ad trapped.
I mean, I think, you know, I guess in a Manhattan taxi, you do see, I don't know, I think that's not really, hopefully that's not the future. I think clients will still pay premium for reach, you know,
right.
Big, popular programs, and then, you know, the web, stuff on the web has to deliver, and I think that in part is the problem. You know, the internet is very accountable, and people are used, you know, been trained by Google, you know, on search to look for ROI, and we have to demonstrate results to clients, which is why I think bringing the advertising and the commerce much more closely together so you can demonstrate the link between the effectiveness of what you do, which is why a lot of clients are going out and creating their own content, either, you know, in the way that Intel have done with Vice or the way that Red Bull do with a lot of their own brands, and the types of brands that have personalities and things to say and positions, and, you know, Jim Stengel-Opinji talked a lot about ideals, you know, so bringing back ideals back into meaning into brands, so you have a point of view on a topic, that gives you something to say. But, you know, if you're selling soap powder, it's tricky, right? You know, moving from the old world to this new world, and there's sort of brands in kind of low interest categories that are much harder to make that work.
Just a question for mine. In terms of, you're seeing YouTube pushing a massive amount of money into the platform right now, so they just announced that they're going to put 100 million into content. We are one of the companies that creates one of the channels there, and the whole idea behind is that they actually want to get brands to invest more into YouTube, to see it as not a platform where cats falling off chairs. This model. Do you believe that this is something that's going to work?
Well, I think YouTube, to me, YouTube YouTube is very interesting. Someone from Google told me, I think not in confidence, but apologies if they did, that they are monetizing YouTube video at the same rate as broad TV content. So if that's true, every minute of video played on YouTube, they're generating the same revenues you would get on network TV or general US, maybe cable TV. So that means YouTube is now able to pay the same to content owners as a traditional media company, if we call them an old media company. So you can see now they can start to think about bidding for rights. They can start to think about bringing more content on. You know, they've done these 100 channel deals. So, you know, the irony is when I look at it, there's very little actual video advertising, and it's still for our clients to recognize that people watching, you know, we all started on this panel with a 60-second video clip. We didn't put a PowerPoint chart up there, right? So everyone understands that video, you know, moving images and sound is much more emotionally resonant than text alone. So if they can't get those ads in there, I think it's harder. But you are starting to see the lengths extend, going into more full-length things. And so I think, you know, with the data that Google are collecting, and then look at what they're doing with Motorola. So the comment in this morning's FT was that, you know, Motorola was more than a patent acquisition, it was a hardware acquisition, which I think is quite clear. And hardware, not, by the way, maybe just phones, but also set-top boxes. So now they're thinking, oh, how do I get my content onto traditional TV, so Google TV? And then think about all the other products they have. So they have Google Wallet, so now they know what you're purchasing, all linked to what you're watching. So I think if you string the things together properly, it becomes a very powerful proposition. Now, maybe it's 3, 4, 5 years out, but they're a very powerful, successful company with a lot of ambitions. And I think that will be good for content owners in a sense of generating revenue for them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, eMarketer just published a report that the US companies are spending about $2 billion every year on branded content, which is mainly to educate consumers and to increase brand loyalty. So I think speaking about these different audiences, right? You guys are on a sort of mass audience, low CPM model. We are a bit more on a, I guess, dedicated, influential, but much smaller audience that brands are paying for. And I think, Jesse, that's sort of the same thing for you as well, right? I mean, you have a very dedicated niche audience. How do you target them? How do you get to know more about them so that you then can turn that into a valuable proposition and effectively sell them to brands?
I mean, I think we target them because of the guests we have on the show, and I think that, you know, we use social media and all of those kinds of things too. But I do kind of feel like YouTube is good for niche audiences. It's a good way to create a niche. But then again, you know, to his point, you are, you know, you do have to go sit down at your computer, sign into YouTube, and search for a video, and that's friction, you know, as opposed to bringing it to the consumer on, you know, on these televisions all over, you know, in these restaurants or wherever. And I think that there's going to be, I don't know, it's just like a whole different world of media, and people will probably go in different directions. And I think different brands want different things. But yeah, I think that we are a niche, definitely.
What I'd actually be interested to know, because you just mentioned social media as well, in building a mass audience, how important is that? You guys have obviously created a conglomerate of individual stars. How important is tagging, is cross-referencing? What role does technology play in this? What role does social media play in this, in a very precise offering to your audience, and probably in a broader and more diversified offering? How do you guys see the role of technology and social media in this whole thing?
Yeah, it's extremely important to our model. It's, you know, it's definitely the key to the distribution. I mean, we have engaged subscriber base, which is kind of gives us a guaranteed kind of lift in viewership for every video put out on our channels. But the talent also has engaged Facebook and Twitter following. So if people miss the video in the subscription box, they can get it via Twitter, you know, Facebook, other social media. But then also that passionate, loyal subscription base, if they like it, they'll spread it through their Facebook and Twitter. And so it's kind of like you know, it's a very networked effect between the talent and our network helping to cross-promote through social media, and then also the passionate fans who are then spreading the videos as well. So it's really kind of a key to how we kind of get our viewership, for sure.
I think it's really, really important to engage your fans in any of, for anyone's audience. It's very important. And I think, using social media, you become kind of like, for us, we become an information source as well as, a platform like a talk show. So we're always promoting content like ours as well. And it's all kind of connected, like you're saying.
Discovery is the challenge, I think, it's so fragmented, there's so much content online, and so I think you're going to see a lot of, through curation or just like tastemakers who, like you said, you're sharing other content that's going to build an audience that beyond who likes your show, likes other similar types of things, and that helps you build a more targeted audience with similar kind of demographic that's into the same type of thing, which then becomes more valuable for advertisers, obviously, if that's the demo they're going after. So I think that's really the kind of tricky thing in all of this, is so much content on YouTube, so much, there's lots of niches everywhere, but there's, how do you know what to find? How do you decide what you want to watch, and how do you find these people and aggregate that audience? So it's very different than a traditional model, and it's constantly evolving, and you have to really adjust quickly and stay on top of technology and how things are changing and shifting.
So can you maybe give us the 3 golden rules of how to build a mass audience?
Me?
Yeah. Well, you've done it.
Well, first, be on the platform that has the most eyeballs, YouTube. Engage your audience. I mean, I think what was special and different about YouTube and why it really took off is there is a really, a real core, engaged, typically a younger demo there that really feels like they know these individuals. And so beyond doing your show or your comedy sketch or your music or whatever it is you do as an entertainer, really speaking directly to them so that they feel a personal connection, responding to them in comments, interacting in ways that fans could normally interact with a TV star or movie star typically is one key thing. To get a real mass audience, you also have to do stuff that is fairly mainstream, and that's why on YouTube, music videos that are the most popular things because it's very mainstream, or topical things, parody sketches, whatever that hits a broad audience and can get embedded on other websites and things like that. Yeah, and then there's tons of tips and tricks on just how to tag things and the right title and thumbnail, and it's really just figuring out how to get in front of as many people as possible so that you're constantly building a new audience, because over time you're always losing some people, but you have to be building more than you're losing, and understanding all the ways to use social media and all these other things to hit a broad audience is very important.
So it's a mix of mass platform, digestible, accessible content, and understanding technology and social media to harness that for your benefit?
Yeah, that's a good summary, I guess. Engaging your audience, building a loyal, kind of hardcore base that you can really count on, and then, creating type of content that has mass appeal.
Can I make one observation on that is it's exactly the same as it used to be, right? Distribution, content, promotion, right? Which is what every TV, show has always been about. At the same time, there's a degree of knowledge and insight you have. Given what you do, you know about tagging, you know how to do this, that I think traditional creatives, if you can call them that, in big media companies don't have. And that's the gap, the knowledge gap. I talk to people in the big sort of national broadcasters, and the sort of the person in charge of digital is tremendously frustrated by the fact that all of these people they have, often on large salaries, don't get the very basics of what you're talking about, which is, I think, good for you in a way.
It is. It's yeah. We're lucky. We were very involved in YouTube and understood it from the very beginning. But I agree with you. I think the knowledge gap is the biggest barrier to entry for, I think, mainstream media and other people trying to get into space. And I personally feel that we will have a better chance of crossing into mainstream media than most mainstream media crossing into online or YouTube. But it's challenging for us to find enough people, and how do you properly train them, and what does that process look like, and how do we train our staff and get them as effective as possible so we can continue to grow and scale the business.
And that's exactly the reason why we did the channel flip acquisition, because this is the talent that you don't have in traditional businesses. This is the talent that you want to acquire, that have worked on these platforms for a couple of years and that understand the tips and tricks. And my issue is exactly right that, finding enough people who have the skill set right now. So a lot of people think they have the skill set, but actually having done it over the last couple of years, there are not a lot of people out there. So that's one of the key skill sets that we actually need more of. And I hope that over the next couple of years it will be developed in a wider scale.
Yeah, so I think that this is interesting, because obviously with 33 million subscribers, you guys have effectively turned a part of your audience into your best marketing instrument. Certainly one of the things that we're seeing as well is that brands come to us in our little niche space of the sort of premium brands and ask us, how do we craft our messages in a way that the audience will actually want to watch it, that it's not interrupting, and that it becomes content and is entertaining. And I'm just thinking about these BMW videos that were created, I think, in 2001, called The Hire. I think we could put these up now, and everybody would still be incredibly entertained by them. So there is long-lasting value when brands understand that they can be broadcasters and can provide entertainment. So Mark, what I'd like to understand from you is, what are you seeing with brands? How do they want to? Probably they want to do the same thing. How do your clients turn their audiences into their best brand ambassadors, into their spokespeople, and how do you turn content into something that is actually desirable rather than interrupting?
Well, I think the best marketing has always been desirable, not interruptive, right? I mean, you'd never buy an issue of Vogue and tear out all the ads and read the articles, right? Most people buy the magazine for the advertising, right? Because the advertising is the content that you want. So when it's well done, either creatively or whether it's well done from a targeting perspective, it's not intrusive. It's when it's badly done, which, by the way, you know, if we're going to talk about privacy and regulation and you know, EU regulation of sort of behavioural advertising, where, you know, somehow targeting messages at people is a bad thing, is, I think, illustrative of why it's not necessarily a bad thing. So when the stuff is relevant, it works well. Now, in all categories, that's not easy. And I think look at what Burberry have done. I think it's really using social media, getting their message out, using all these platforms. I think that, so it depends on a sort of a partnership between the agency and the client, and it depends a lot on the client and how interested and engaged the client is. I think our creative people in general are actually most of our creative people are very stimulated by this. I mean, they are on YouTube looking at the ads they do and looking at the comments that people put on them, right? So that's not a barrier in the agencies. If there's a barrier in the agencies, it's probably sort of in our account management departments. But I think, you know, forward-thinking clients, forward-thinking creative people, you can create interesting work that engages.
Yeah, I agree. So I think follow-up question to that is where are the roadblocks? Is it that this is only for certain brands who play possibly in a higher set? I mean, you mentioned Vogue, you mentioned Burberry. So is this something that is not really suitable for mass market brands? Is it that there is a problem with the mindset? Is it just a question of time? Why aren't we seeing much more of this innovation towards creating desirable content? Or is there just not enough creativity for all brands?
You're saying start with consumers are ahead of everybody, right? So consumers are driving all of this, and us, you know, clients, agencies, we're all catching up with what consumers are doing. I think that's the first thing to say. Secondly, it varies category by category, and it does depend. You know, don't forget, if you're a client in, you know, country X, you have sales targets to hit. You know, you need to ship something to Walmart, and the old ways work, right? You know, if you spend this on TV and you achieve that rating points, it will lead to this trial, this, you know, in-store. So the systems are set up. You know, the system, if you like, you can blame for a lot of this. And lots of this new media stuff is sort of at the margin. You know, okay, so digital is 17% of ad spend, but there's still 83 that's traditional, right? And maybe in the US it's 25 or more for, you know, a progressive client. So some of this stuff is at the margin and is not driving sales in a sort of reliable way. It's much more hit-driven. It can be good, it can be bad, and, you know, people don't want to take risks. But I think that you know, forward-thinking clients that experiment, that look at categories. You know, Unilever took 30 people to CES. So some, you know, lots of clients are sort of much more engaged. So I think it is not to sound defensive, but part of it is time.
Yeah. So well, I think that sort of leads nicely into data, which is obviously becoming more relevant. We know much more. You said one of the, I guess, the biggest problem and the biggest benefit of the web is that everything is measurable. So I think initially, what role does data play in the creative process? Because one of the things that I've noticed is when you go to news websites, you know, in the past you had the editor and the editorial team that were really driving the agenda, with them either anticipating or deciding what the audience might want to know or should know. Now you see on the sort of front of every page, you see most viewed, most shared, most emailed. Who's in charge? What drives the creative process? The audience or the editors, or what is it?
I think that, you know, obviously data is incredibly important, and brands and everybody wants that more than anything. And I think there's places where you can measure it. I don't know if that's what you want to go into, but we only do deals with distribution companies that will provide us with their data, and then we just put together our own kind of thing.
What's it like for you guys? I mean, you see everything, right? You see likes, comments, drop-off rates. How much does that drive you?
I think, there's lots of different kinds of data. I think what was really exciting about YouTube in the beginning was you get instant feedback. So like, are these people liking this or not? And while you don't want to totally change your content for your audience, you can sometimes get a lot of really great feedback there and help tailor something towards something that they're liking more. And so with the commenting and likes and subscriptions and just how many views it gets, all that kind of stuff, is instantaneous in a sense of seeing how well something's doing. You dig deeper into like the YouTube Insight, and you can see obviously demographic data, age group, and understanding who your audience is better. Like, okay, YouTube, for instance, is a very young audience, is the people who are the subscribers, the ones that are really active and driving it. So, we definitely started tailoring some of our content more to a younger audience. And if we were going to do a parody, we wouldn't try not to do it on some obscure 70s kind of reference or something, like certain things just will go clear of their head. So if you understand who your core demo is, you can tailor it a bit. Then it becomes a challenge of how do you attract a different demographic, understanding, I'd like to get to an older audience, maybe creating that content will have them come. Maybe you can partner, do some cross-promotion with other websites that have a different type of audience. I think you can also obviously get into territories and understanding, oh wow, and we have a huge audience in the UK or for some reason this content is doing really well in different countries and whatnot. So I mean that's all very interesting stuff and can be helpful. I think the data we don't have is more like on and what we need to kind of do on our own. It's not provided by YouTube. Is really understanding, besides age and where people live, like what are they into, what do they like, what were they, just from an advertising perspective. And so that's kind of like the next challenge of really gathering your own data through whether it be collecting emails and questionnaires or whatever it may be to help really better understand, kind of the lifestyle per se of the viewers for particular channels and better being able to present that in a way that I think advertisers would be more likely to, advertise on,
I think Facebook's definitely helped with, like personal information, and you can do such targeted ads on that. It's really interesting.
Mark, what are WPP's learnings on how consumers interact with content and brand messages in social media, in video, in mobile?
I think the data thing is sort of a curse and a blessing. A certain amount of data to build insights is obviously critical, but truly great ideas are just truly great ideas, and we sort of somehow have to separate that a little bit from the data. So I think we think about data in terms of measuring effectiveness or building insight, but the creative process is something special and unique. And I don't think good creative people are scared of data, but I'm terrified of the sort of days when newspapers are all driven by the top 10 stories people read, because I think you sort of might end up in like the lowest common denominator of sort of data-driven editorial, the sort of content farm area. So I think we need to be sort of careful in how we use it, but insightful in how we use it, to state the obvious.
Well, so obviously you mentioned a good idea is just a good idea. So let's talk about brand value and image and perception for a moment, because you can't always measure that and the ROI in the immediate term. So with all this data available, do you find it sometimes difficult to pressure, nudge, advise brands to move into this content world and create more, because they say, oh, there isn't enough data available, so we'll just stick doing what works so far, and innovation isn't so important for us?
No, I don't think so. I think there's enough successful examples of what people have done out there that brands don't need to have specific data, and we can measure, image, and we can run surveys and ask people, right? We can look at the brand lift of banner ads, we can look at the brand lift of sponsorship. So all of this stuff, the attitudinal stuff and behavior stuff, is measurable. So I think even more measurable on the web, actually, because you know whether someone looks at it versus you don't. So that's more easily done. I don't think that's a problem for us.
So, in the past it was very much just about eyeballs. Now it's about which eyeballs, engagement. What do they do with the content, and consumers can avoid brand messages, right? I mean, we heard people just click away on YouTube on the video ads. So can you tell all of us here, really, what are you guys going to be expecting from us independent new media companies in the future so that we can make a living?
So I think we need, I guess, good ideas, large volumes. We're going to need much more lower cost production of video. I think, the integration of brand messages into content has to be carefully done. We actually had a joint venture with Shine 10 years ago looking at advertiser-funded programming, and we never really managed to. It's hard enough to make a good TV program without making a good TV program with a brand somehow squeezed into it. So I think in a traditional context that's hard to do. In a new media context, it's a little bit easier, and I think the creative process is more free-flowing, and you can try more things out, and you can figure out what works. So I think we're looking for more of that. Stuff that engages young people, stuff for the sort of faster growing markets of the world. And the real thorny issue to crack is how we do this for what I would call low interest categories. So how do we help the Procters and Gambles, the Unilevers of this world, and the FMCG category get their message out online with content? That's that's the trickiest part of what we're trying to do.
So is the future for that, does that not lie in storytelling and in creating content rather than ads?
Perhaps. I mean, I just think it's hard to create a story about detergent, an interesting story, so perhaps. I mean, maybe those brands will stay on the TV platforms with the more traditional view of advertising, and the categories will shift. So some brands, I guess the point is, some brands have more interesting stories to tell than others. But if you have nothing to say, in the future, it's going to be much harder. So you have to think what you have to say. You have to look into your heritage. You have to look at your product. You have to have innovation. Without innovation, there's no product stories. There's nothing to talk about. So I think you'll see, from a client perspective, they're going to need to innovate even more in the future to have more interesting things to say to consumers.
So we can all feel comfortable that you and your brands are going to be supporting us
the
going
dollars,
forward.
We haven't really discussed everyone's absolute revenues today, so the dollars will follow. Yeah, I guess so.
That's good news. Yoel, how do you guys deal with that?
By the way, can I just say one thing? So someone had a go at me about traditional media companies yesterday because we asked them for, cost and performance. And I don't think that's sort of traditional. That's what we should be doing for our clients, right? So I think we mustn't lose track of what we have to do, which is demonstrate value to clients in the goal of chasing something new. But that's not what you were suggesting, obviously.
Clearly not, because that's not what any of us are doing. But Yoel, how does that work out for you? And then I want to open up to the floor just for a few questions. How do you translate all of this into content, because obviously what you're selling now aren't ads, but media properties and fantastic content and stories.
I think that works out perfectly for what we're doing in terms of, at the heart, it's exactly the storytelling, is creating stories that matter to people and building brands around it. If I talk about brands, I talk about our media brands and not brand partners in a sense. Where it's suitable, we're going to work with all the brand partners possible, and where it's not conflicting with the content that we're trying to create. And that's the model that we're going to pursue.
Fantastic. So does anybody have any questions for our panel? I'm sure there's a microphone that could go around. I see someone back there. And the microphone's coming your way. Or you could stand up and shout if you want to tell us who you are and your question.
Hi, I'm Keith Boski. A lot of the things that you were saying about the web sound like things we said about cable television 20 years ago. And I'm just wondering, you talked about being at CES, and as we see all of these IP addressable boxes and televisions coming up, do you see, especially from a sponsorship standpoint, the distinction between what we're calling television and what we're calling the web breaking down?
So I think, yes. I mean, if the world is just full of screens, and I think consumers will sort of increasingly see it like that, the means by which things get on those screens is just going to change. And it's going to change from sort of a pipe with 100 fixed channels into an internet connection through which people will watch everything. I do think what, we didn't talk about ZBox, and any of you seen ZBox? Is an iPad app that's kind of like the EPG, so the electronic program guide for the future. So you can see, what's on each channel, you can see the Twitter stream into it, and you can think about how when your iPad becomes the remote control for your TV, it's sort of those two screens interacting. So I think we are going from that kind of fixed, sort of monolithic cable, one-way cable world into a two-way distribution system where what you use what screen for is not really clear at any particular time, and the screens will interact with each other perhaps at the same time, and you have to think in a multi-screen world. So we increasingly don't think about, maybe we won't talk about TV, web, print, whatever, it's just different screens, 4 screens, or maybe more screens than 4 screens.
Any more questions?
I have a question for Danny. So you were saying before that advertising is like where you're making all of your money, but you want it to be like where you're making half of your money. Where are you going to get the other money from? Well, is that going to be like the brands, getting different kind of deals and making board games and that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing a lot of our talent does music, so we're seeing a lot of iTunes sales, merchandising around the brands we're building. I think through the fact that we have a studio, there's going to be production services, other revenue streams. So just kind of diversifying, where are we getting our revenue from, I think is important moving forward. So there's not completely dependent on brands because that money isn't quite there yet, and maybe over time it will get there within a couple or 3 years, but I think it's very important for us to build our own talent brands and IP that could potentially have value outside of...
and then merchandise off of it.
And merchandising, and something could become a movie or a television show, or there's merchandising, or right. And there's also, it's a very large audience we have that can be leveraged and driven to certain places. So it's I think there's a lot of different opportunities and revenue streams that we can kind of explore and experiment and see what's really working and how to generate additional revenue. But certainly advertising and brands will be a core, main focus. Yeah, but we don't want to, we try to just not, focus as much on what does the brand want versus building our brand of the talent, and finding that right balance is kind of the tricky part. How does this brand interact with the talent brand in a way that is providing value for the audience and isn't turning off the audience and damaging the talent brand. And a lot of times brands are scared of some of our content. It's not as clean or whatever, and sometimes our talent's scared of what that brand watering down their kind of content's going to do. So it's a little tricky to navigate.
Well, and also on the internet, it lasts. It's kind of lives forever too. So when that brand gets in there, it's always there.
Maybe finally, just as hashtag shameless self-promotion, come and talk to us. We have Shine 360, which is an ancillary business. The whole thing they do is to identify great revenue streams and help you to monetize that.
Yeah, so this screen says we've got just about a minute left, so if there's one last question in the audience, right there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make more comments. I thought it was an interesting, great panel.
Thank you.
Just everybody's really interesting. But I thought, Danny, what your last comment was the most interesting to me, because what I had observed as everybody's talking was this notion of nothing being linked to any one thing. So, MasterChef is great because you get that people live real lives, so you do events and you do cookbooks and do all kinds of things. You're looking for all kinds of alternate ways of distributing your content, even through Taco Bell. And I thought it was really interesting that at the end, when you were talking about monetization, you said TV shows. And so coming back to Mark's point, TV's not dead. So even in the YouTube world, we're still looking to monetize by looking at that, God forbid, old thing called TV shows. The last point was that even though soap might not be particularly interesting from a story point of view, as we know, one of the things that drove television in the early days was soap operas. So even back then, in the early 50s, companies realized the need to connect to content. And they knew that their particular story might not be interesting enough, but they linked it to content that was directed towards a particular audience, and it was a very, very strong. So in fact, I'd argue that they were probably where we would love to be today. And I think that as we go forward, and again, I think congratulations to all of you for being so open to keep moving. So well done.
Thank you. So I guess, well, in conclusion, we're seeing that a screen is a screen is a screen. So the television show is on your iPad, is on Boxy, on Roku, is everywhere. And as long as we have engaged audiences, we can monetize our stories across many platforms and make money on all of those, which creates viable business models, even in the digital age, for those who doubt it, and they can originate from digital, because people want to be entertained, and as long as we have good stories that entertain them, we can do all of this. And I'm glad that we can all work together, and Mark's going to continue to push some ad dollars our way.
we pay for everything, you mean?
It's marvelous. So thank you very much, Yoel, Jesse, Danny, and Mark, and thank you for being here so early in the morning.